So Apple's September event just went down where they showcased some new phones and some watches. I'm going to focus this video on their phones, the iPhone 15s and 15 Pros. So I'm going to start with the Pro. The thing that makes the Pro model this year, the defining feature for me, is the build. So this is now using a titanium frame. It still has an aluminum kind of inner chassis, but the outer frame, the thing we grip, is titanium. Now, this frame, when you see it in the videos, it looks really cool, but when you hold it in person, when you see it in person, it's actually a very different kind of vibe. So when I looked at the four colors, there's a black, a white, a blue, and then a kind of natural gray looking color. I would have assumed that that blue was like, it would be my favorite color, right? It's blue, but when you see it in person, there's something about that natural gray color that looks so cool. It's got this like satin, like matte finish that's just, I think it looks pretty awesome. So this titanium material is both lighter and stronger than the traditional steel frame they've had in the past in the Pro models. And it's a little more fingerprint resistant because it's got this nice brushed texture to it, but it's also lighter. It's not like a massive difference. When I look at the numbers, it's like 8-9%, so it's still single digit percentage change in terms of the weights from the last year's steel framed models, but it is noticeable. I do think that the biggest benefit for the consumer picking up one of these Pro models in terms of the titanium, for one, you get to flex the fact that you have a titanium iPhone. But the other thing is that I think it's just much more scratch resistant. So on the titanium Apple Watches, like the Apple Watch Ultra, I've banged mine up a bunch, and anytime I've made contact with even something like metal or stone, it just does not seem to scratch this material. It's very durable, and I imagine the same would be for the new titanium iPhone Pros. Now, in terms of the design, they still have the fairly iconic Apple iPhone look that they've been running for the past 5 or 6 years. They didn't do anything crazy even with that new material, but there is a action button that's replaced the kind of mute switch that they've been running since the beginning of iPhones. And this is quite interesting. So in its default state, it serves as a mute notification still. So you'll tap it to kind of check the state that it's in. But if you hold it down for a second, it'll actually toggle between the mute or the kind of regular unmuted version. And then you can go into the software in settings and change what this action button does. And they actually have, just right out of the box, a lot of different options. You can launch the camera system, you can open up certain apps, you can obviously use shortcuts and just basically do whatever you wanted to do. And we're not just talking about opening up a custom app. Because of shortcuts, you can sequence a whole series of stuff that it can do just off a press of that action button. Now, it sounds really cool, but my immediate thoughts, and this is just after having used it for a very short period of time, is that for a lot of people that are used to the kind of standard mute switch of a regular iPhone, the ability to customize a button is almost like too much choice, right? So if you do switch it to, say, like launching your camera, you've lost that functionality on the kind of exterior buttons of the phone, which we've been used to for over a decade, right? So now you'd have to go into the pull-down menus to mute your phone if you want to. But the best feature that I think that they announced was the inclusion of USB-C on all of the iPhones, obviously including the iPhone 15 Pros. Now on the Pros, you get the fast USB 3 speed, so it's excellent for offloading files off of these devices. If there's like huge video or photo files, you can just dump them off way quicker than on a previous iteration of iPhone. But for one, I never thought this would happen, I'll be honest. I thought this would be like some pipe dream that we all been hoping for. But the other thing that came to my mind was like, I wondered how they were going to announce this if they ever did. Because I was like, are they going to pretend like they've somehow invented this amazing connectivity technology? But they just mentioned it as some like passing thing, now has USB-C, and it was received very well by the audience. But do keep in mind that that fast USB 3 speed is only going to be available on the Pro models. The regular iPhone 15s will have slower USB 2 speeds. Okay, we can wrap. So it's possible that I wasn't supposed to even be in that area shooting, so I decided to move everything back to the hotel to finish this video off. But USB-C 3.0 in the iPhone 15 Pro is awesome. And because you have that high-speed connection, you can now connect an external SSD to an iPhone 15 Pro, and it now enables 4K 60 ProRes being shot onto an external drive, like an 8 terabyte SSD plugged up right up to the phone, which is higher like frame rate than if you've just used the internal storage of that device. Pretty neat. Okay, I'm gonna move this conversation over to the cameras because the camera system this year on the iPhone 15 Pros is really neat. You don't need to switch the phone to a portrait mode to be able to take portrait shots. Like you can just use the default camera mode, and if you're shooting like a human face or a pet's face, it'll automatically detect the fact that it's shooting a face. Those are the shots that look best with portrait photography, and it'll just switch it to that mode automatically. And even better is that post, like once you've taken that shot, you can adjust the focal point in your photo. It really feels like almost like light field camera stuff. It's super cool. Now keep in mind that the demo that they showed in the marketing material seemed amazing, and I wasn't able to test it out with the hand-on units they had available. Now in terms of the zooms, the iPhone 15 Pro has a 3x zoom, so just like last year's zoom capabilities, but the iPhone 15 Pro Max, that has a wild new kind of telephoto capability. So it now has a 5x zoom, and it uses a prism, a tetra prism to be precise, so the light bounces 4 times before it hits the sensor, and this sensor is 25% bigger than the sensor we saw on the iPhone 14 Pro Max last year. But the thing I found really interesting is that this technology was not what we had expected. So I think a lot of the rumors pointed to a more powerful zoom, and the obvious kind of comparison was a periscope zoom, the stuff that we've seen on a lot of Samsung devices and other Chinese phones, where the whole idea of any of this kind of zoom technology is really to extend the distance between the front of the lens and then the sensor. And so there's obviously many ways to do it, but with this Apple variant of it, or the Apple kind of iteration of it, they've done it using a very small device. It's a prism that is much smaller than the traditional periscope stuff that we've seen from Samsung. And because of that, it allows the sensor to be quite big on this iPhone 15 Pro Max. Also, the thing I noticed is that the stabilization, at least from my very quick demonstration of it, was really good. So I had it up at 5x, which isn't nearly as zoomed in as a 10x Samsung product, but when I had this held up, I was like very surprised at how steady that shot was. The other thing that's interesting is the main sensor has 3 focal lengths that you can toggle between, or you can cycle between just by pressing the 1x button on the camera app. So it'll go between 24, 28, and 35mm focal lengths, all being shot off that main sensor. And you can also set the default focal length that you want, like when you launch the app. It's just so much more customization than what iPhones have ever offered for their Pro camera devices. So pretty cool. The chip that powers the iPhone 15 Pro devices is the new A17 Pro chip. This thing is the world's first 3nm chip in a smartphone. And well, it's TSMC's 3nm tech. It's bound to be faster and more energy efficient than anything we've seen from Apple before. Now, a lot of the other features that are on the 15 Pro models are also shared by the regular 15. So I think this is a good point to kind of transition to the regular iPhone 15. The colors seem kind of pale to me this year. They're almost muted. Not that they're bad looking. I think they're actually really nice looking devices, but the color isn't as vibrant as some of the older iPhones of the past. Now, one of the kind of design changes that they've made is that the back glass has a tint to it. They use some kind of process to color the glass, and it gives it this almost like hard candy kind of look to it. I think it looks really nice. And then the texture on that back glass has this frosted, almost satin finish to it. It's like a very smooth, kind of buttery feel to it. Now you may have noticed that at this point in the video, I haven't mentioned anything about the rounded edges of these phones, either the Pro models or the regular iPhone 15s. And it's simply because I forgot to. In my time spent outside, I think I was gonna get to it and I had to move. So I gotta mention it now. Both of these devices have rounded edges. I personally think it's a very big difference in feel. I don't think it's something that like really defines the product though. I think it's something that you just get used to regardless of what the marketing material tells you. When I pick this thing up, it does feel different, but it's not like, oh my God, this phone feels so much better because it's got rounded corners. It's different, but I do think that it looks not as nice. I think the clean, sharp edges of the existing iPhone models look really nice. The other thing I want to mention real quickly is the screen. So this year's iPhone 15 models have much brighter screens at the top end, so it's great for outdoor viewing, and they also have a dynamic island on this year's iPhone 15 models. Now, when I found out these were still 60 Hz screens, I was convinced that the animations would just be really choppy and laggy, but they actually look perfectly fine. That being said, I think it's criminal that they have a device of this caliber that has so many amazing features, except it still has a 60 Hz screen. It's just really weird to me, but I think they just do it because they gotta separate that Pro model from the regular model, and this is like one of the last things that they can really do that affects most people, the 60 hertz versus ProMotion screen. It has a USB-C port. I love to see that, even though it's still the slower USB 2.0 protocol, but it does have just universal charging. That's really the main feature that we're looking for here. And the camera system looks to be nicely upgraded as well. It's also running a 48 megapixel sensor, and it also does that automatic portrait mode trick that I was talking about earlier. But because I'm running out of light, I'm gonna wrap up this video.